Hello, I'm Karen Jefford and welcome to The Human Advantage. I bring 20 years worth of experience of working in the sector, and it's a passion of mine. You know, I'm very lucky that I go to work and I love what I do, and I think there's not many people that can say that. The charity sector was where I found my passion, and, you know, it's people doing good. And so the reason that my co-host, Alessandro, who you'll hear from shortly, the reason that we've brought our expertise together is really to support the sector, to be the conduit to join charities and corporate organisations to do good for communities. And the Human Advantage is about exactly what it says, bringing humans together. In a world that has become very digital, very AI, we know that that's a valuable tool, but there's nothing more powerful than that human touch, and as we call it, the human advantage.
I'm Alessandro Calzolari, and as you said, like Karen, my background is in consumer psychology, why people buy what they buy. So sometimes they say, we want to generate more revenue, we want to secure funding. Okay, there are two different ways. One is more about your actions. So we look at from an empathic point of view, how can I put myself in the shoes of the other person so I craft a message which resonates with the other person. But on the other side, any action is made up of decision. So we also look at from an internal marketing point of view. So your inner voice, self-talk, all the different things that allowed you to make better decisions, to save in terms of marketing cost, to maybe secure funding, or to generate more revenue. So from a more psychological point of view, which is what is necessary to become more human.
So today's conversation is an interesting one because it's about values. And there's an interesting statement. Most mission-driven businesses are accidentally pushing customers away. That's quite a scary thought, isn't it?
It is. And sometimes we also need to define, because value is a really important word personally, but also for a business point of view. And if we don't define the meaning of value, sometimes we go out of track. So what's, for example, for you, the definition of value?
I think people often assume, don't they, that once values are written, they're on a website, they're agreed, they sign off, they're a given. But in reality, for me, they underpin everything. You know, it's your internal compass. What becomes, really clear is if your values aren't actively guiding how you communicate, then how can you make decisions? They start to disappear, and then who are you? What are your values? What do you stand by? What do you believe in? And that's why today is exactly we're bringing two perspectives. My perspective from the charity, what I see day in, day out, and your expertise from a psychological point of view. And what value really means in practice. Not what does it sound like, nice fluffy word, that sounds grand, collaborative, integrity, but it's actually how they show up in everyday business. Because when values are clear, things click. And when they're not, you kind of feel and seal it everywhere.
You use a very important word that it sounds for you, probably you define value as something intrinsic, which comes from inside.
Inside, yeah.
How you feel. Based on my interpretation, but also from a psychological point of view, sometimes I see value more like an extrinsic, something outside. What the other person, whether it's a customer, client, or another stakeholder, can get from me. So it's very, very important not just to have values, but also how I define value. Because for me, value is something that a person can get, but what you describe for me is more purpose. So the difference between the two, based on my experience, is the value is a translation of what I deliver. While the purpose is the direction of my mission, something that is more linked to identity. So does this reflect what I believe compared to what the other person can get working with me?
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because both of us could look at a piece of art.
Yeah.
We're both looking at the same thing, but may articulate it in a different way. We may feel something different from it. And so I guess for me, having those keywords, those values that you stand by. For me, or particularly in the charity sector, what I see, it's that internal, as I said earlier, internal compass, the ideas that help shape the choices that you make, the relationships you have, or the actions you might take. And sometimes, those values may be the decision factor to actually sometimes say no. I think, the whole thing around integrity, collaboration, transparency, if I'm honest, from what I've seen, they don't really mean anything until they cost you something.
Absolutely. What I think sometimes, even when I work with clients, sometimes they use some different terminology. Some people, they use maybe value. Other people, they use purpose. Other people, they use maybe a mission statement. So what is your take about maybe the difference between a mission statement, your values, if there is any kind of things that we can maybe share, because we have two different perspective, but they also complement. There is anything that, based on your experience, about maybe a mission statement, what's the difference between a mission statement, a value statement, or a value proposition? There is anything that's...
That's an interesting one, because I think for me, purpose is what you stand for.
Right.
And the mission statement is a statement in itself, what you do, almost, isn't it? So values are how that actually shows up in the decisions that you make. Or for charities, they're lived every single day. So the mission statement is a direction. These are the people that we're supporting and the goal. I'll give you a scenario. I'm a chief exec of a youth charity, and our mission is supporting young people now, laying the foundations for the future. So that mission statement for us is quite agile, because we've got to, every single day there's something different for every young person. So for me, that purpose and mission are quite similar. It's what you do. But the values are, for me, the internal compass. They are the, I think you and I have talked about it before, the North Star, isn't it?
Yes.
It's the guidance of when you might do something or when you might not.
Right.
What do you believe is the right thing for your organisation?
And I was the rethinking, because you share something very, very valuable, where I think the majority of charities, corporations, despite the fact they might have 30 years of experience, they forget that a value statement, whether we call a mission statement, value statement, that is more a personal interpretation. But it's something that is like a baby. It's going to evolve over time.
Yeah.
Sometimes we are really, really good, in particular nowadays with maybe AI. We're going to ask, can you draft a value statement? And that value statement is going to last for them maybe 10 years. While in reality, I mentioned about this many, many times. Every Saturday, I'm going to refine my value statement. So I'm going to think, okay, so from Monday to Friday, I had a lot of interactions. Can I learn by listening, and what is called empathic marketing? Can I listen what people say? Because sometimes we think the value statement is something that we create internally within the company or the charity. But in reality, there is a stakeholder that is the only one that can define the value statement, the mission statement. So it's very, very important to consider the value statement something that you should change really, really quickly, because you want to resonate with the other person.
So, Alessandro, how do you feel that works then? Because if I use the sector, the charity sector, as I said earlier, once the statements or those values are agreed at board level, everyone agrees, you stand by it, it's on your website. If you're suggesting that perhaps after a week of business, you've reflected on your conversations and you go back to those values, are you saying perhaps that you change those key statement words, or maybe you may articulate things in a slightly different way?
If we stick with for me, a value statement is something that the other person can get. And within that, you should also include what I call a purpose or a mission. I wouldn't suggest to change the entire value statement. Otherwise, you are changing your identity. It's what I usually suggest is to change one word, 2 words, that allow the other person, the potential client, potential customer, or the stakeholder to really resonate with you. It's like changing the 5%, the 10% rather than the entire statement.
I'll give you a real scenario. You know, charities are forever chasing after the next funding pot.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's been a few scenarios. I've been in this scenario where, you know, we've been invited to apply for funding. We've been successful in the funding, but the funder has come back and we've got to adhere to a criteria. Absolutely right. But what we've got to do to achieve that money is outside of the everyday with what we would deliver. So there's got to be a significant change. And so for me, often it's about going back to those values. Yes, you know, we need to keep the lights on. The organisation, the charity needs to keep going. But there's this big chunk of funding that's available to us that could make all the difference. But we've got to change. And that's what I go back to earlier, is sometimes going back to those values and that decision-making process. They are that guiding kind of internal compasses. Does this feel right? Is this right for us? And sometimes we have to say no. And that's a potential scenario that we're up against all the time. Yes, in principle on paper, that funding looks amazing. But when you look down at the nitty-gritty, actually, that takes you away from, you know, your morals, your ethics, values of what your organisation stands for.
Probably now I'm reflecting, because we use a very strong word like a North Star, so give us direction. But when you have a value statement, and by the way, you need to write a value statement, because if you are a CEO of a company and you have a very strong value statement, but no one know your value statement, so it's very, very important to write down, so you can also give to other person and other people within your team something that they can also visualize. A value statement or mission statement is abstract. The importance, where I see a lot of people that they have the strongest value statement, but they don't get, for example, funding, is where they don't use the same language as the other person. So a value statement, if we think about empathic marketing, you should also refine the value statement based on the other person. Maybe you keep the same value statement, the essence, but you're going to refine based on the other person. So if as a charity, sometimes we are more storytelling, more emotional. But if I'm a business, I want to know what I can get from that. So I need to make maybe the value statement more logical rather than emotional.
So there's a language thing here as well, because we know between the charities and corporate organisation we speak two different languages.
Yes.
You know, you're Italian, I'm English.
Yes.
We understand each other, but sometimes we need to articulate it in a way that we can both understand. And I guess that's a similar thing.
Let me give you an analogy. It's the analogy of maybe the soil and the seed. If the seed is the value statement and the soil is maybe the market, sometimes the same value statement put in the wrong context has a completely different value. If value is something extrinsic which comes from outside.
Yeah.
So it's very, very important to refine your value statement, not just to improve the value statement based on interactions that you had during the week, but also based on the other person. When the other person feels that you understand them, maybe you are speaking the same language because you are sharing the same mission, that is where you attract the other person. So make something which is intangible, tangible, but also applicable.
I think values for me have got to be a decision-making tool. You know, they've got to help you be clear on what does growth look like, help make decisions faster, teams feel more confident, and there's consistency. And I think that's a really important word.
Yeah.
You know, it's very good to be reactive and do things, but unless there isn't consistency there, then that's when things start to dilute. And
when you say consistency, what do you mean by consistency, for example? In what regard consistency?
Consistent to how you show up. Okay. So, you know, stand by what you say you're going to deliver. And, you know, be consistent in your message, in your marketing, in your values, in your storytelling. Although I picked up when you referenced storytelling earlier, there is an importance to understand who your audience is, because the message you might tell to one audience could be different to somebody else. It will be the same message, but you might articulate it in the same way. And similarly, I'm picking up your saying that actually you refine your values based on the conversations you had. So similarly with this one, it is about maybe refining, but it is consistency to do that.
I was thinking consistency from a different angle.
Okay.
Because when we think about communication, we think maybe verbal communication.
Right.
But there is also an image or maybe a video. So sometimes I see inconsistency, the opposite, where you say something, but from a visual point of view or maybe a written point of view, it's going to give you a different message. So consistency needs to be, for me, in 4 different formats. One is the visual with an image. Does the image reflect what I also say in a written form? The video and also how I show up. So like the meta marketing, the second area of expertise, if you don't align who you are with what you do, you are inconsistent. And when you have a value statement, the value statement help you to be consistent in any kind of shape and form.
I think it's an interesting one because charities are often in survival mode. So there's always that tension between staying true to your values versus keeping things going.
Yeah.
So I've worked with an organisation that had the opportunity to partner with a really big, well-known organisation. You know, great brand. It would give them great visibility. It ticked all the external boxes. But internally there were concerns because it didn't quite align. Their values didn't marry. Now look, do they need to marry? Because sometimes, you know, you talk about yin and yang, but actually they were so far removed, it wasn't the right move, and they didn't actually go ahead.
Right.
Now that was a brave move to have not done that, but actually by doing that they did end up with the right partner. But I think the whole, you know, consistency, survival mode, staying true to your values, you know, how do you make sure that happens?
I'm very, very curious because sometimes when, let's take the example of the unique selling point, why you are different. Let's say there is company A versus company B, charity A, charity versus B. And sometimes when we define the unique selling point, the why, many companies, and I've been involved in this kind of a process, they think that the best person to draft a value statement, a unique selling point, is someone in the team. When in reality, it's your client. You can't position yourself in the mind of the other person, which is a client. They position you. So the best way is to really listen to the other person, and the person that should craft your value statement is the audience, not you.
I couldn't agree more on that point. Yeah.
Have you ever seen like, let's say that you define value from a more intrinsic, internal. I define from an extrinsic. What you define like a value for me is more maybe a purpose, a mission. So these are labeling. It doesn't make any huge difference. The only thing we need to be clear what we are looking at is something that we give to the other person, something that is maybe a process, what I define a value, or is something that we introspect, we read our emotions. Do you think that sometimes there is an imbalance between what we believe and what the other person can get? Why many value statements, they are not like successful? So you can't get the result from a value statement. There is an imbalance of something. There is any kind of problem that, based on your experience, a company, a charity can like tweak something and make the value statement more applicable.
You remind me of a scenario that I once had. I used to work in the corporate sector, and the founder of about 25 years was retiring. And on his last day, he did a speech as to why he set up the organisation. And it was like a light bulb moment. Everybody suddenly realised why we were there. But it took 25 years for that man to share that personal story for people to understand. So I think now, from that lesson learned all those years ago, I've made it my mission to bring our whole team together so that you become one voice, that you do understand. And I think for me, the values have allowed a team to trust the leadership,
Okay.
that you're all on the same page, singing from the same hymn sheet. There's clarity in decision making, and you become confident in your future choices, and everybody's aligned. So we may articulate it differently, but everybody knows what the goals.
Right.
And I think there's a confidence in having those values there.
Brilliant. So before we come to a conclusion, I really, really like the suggesting for everyone that is going to listen this conversation.
Yeah.
That I see like two extremes. One extreme is when the person put too much about the why they are doing what they are doing without telling to the other person, the other stakeholder, what they get. Or sometimes that is the other way around. They are really, really like, you are going to get X, Y, and Z, but there is no story behind that. So when I work with clients, I always say, if the other person is more logical, they like numbers, put more emphasis on the numbers, what they get. If they like more the story, instead start with the story. So the balance between the two is where I think many people with just a small tweak, they can get much better results. So to conclude from what we have just discussed, a value statement isn't a statement. It's a perception shaped in someone else's mind.